All right, today we're diving into 3 really innovative designs for teaching and learning. And these aren't just minor tweaks, they're built for the complex world we actually live in right now and for the challenges that are just around the corner. So, let's just start with a big question. What if learning wasn't about just, memorizing a bunch of facts for a test? What if it was really about getting the skills to tackle problems that don't have a neat, tidy answer?
You can think of education as this big, complex machine with all these interlocking parts. Today, we're going to look at 3 specific upgrades for that machine. We're talking about a framework, a process, and a core skill, and we'll see how they all work together to power a totally new kind of learning.
Look, if we're going to solve the real messy challenges our world is facing, we need a whole new approach to learning. So let's start way up high with the big picture. And that big picture, it's a framework called challenge-based learning. This is a complete game changer in how you can think about what a class or a project can even be. So challenge-based learning, or CBL for short, is basically a system for learning while you're solving authentic, real-world problems. What's so cool about it is that it empowers everybody involved, students, teachers, people in the community, to stop just studying a topic and actually start taking action. So how does it work? Well, it's a pretty clear 3-step cycle. First, you engage. That's where you take a huge idea like sustainability, and you narrow it down to a real concrete challenge like, hey, how can we reduce food waste in our own cafeteria? Then you investigate. You dig in, you do the research, you ask the tough questions. And finally, you act. You use everything you've learned to design, build, and test out a real solution, like starting a new composting program. And this is not just some academic exercise, right? The entire spirit of challenge-based learning is right here in this phrase. It's all about making a real, immediate, tangible impact. Okay, so if CBL is our big game plan for taking action, how do you actually come up with a great solution inside that plan? Well, to answer that, we need to zoom in a little bit and look at a specific process called design thinking. Design thinking is tailor-made for what experts call wicked problems. And you've seen these everywhere. Things like designing a course that's actually engaging or trying to improve public health. These aren't problems with one single right answer. They're messy, the goals can be fuzzy, and you're always looking for a better solution, not just the correct one. And this process gives us a roadmap to get through all that messiness. It always starts with empathy, truly understanding the people you're designing for. From there, you define what the real problem is. Then, and only then, do you ideate and just brainstorm tons of potential solutions. You take the best of those ideas and build a quick prototype that you can actually get in front of people, which leads to the final stage, testing it to get real feedback. Here's what that actually looks like. This is the ideate phase, right in the middle of the action. You've got a professor who's tackling the wicked problem of a really dry philosophy course. And notice, instead of starting with a list of topics, they're brainstorming the outcomes they want for their students. Things like making new connections and getting them excited about learning on their own. And here is where that process leads. That brainstorming session sparked an idea, gamification, and it was brought to life as this prototype leaderboard. It's a real, tangible solution, specifically designed to encourage those exact behaviors the professor wanted, like self-guided learning. Now, this all looks amazing, but it kind of brings up a huge question, right? All of this hinges on one thing: students being able to think critically and creatively. So how do you actually turn on that designer way of thinking in the first place? To get at that, we've got to zoom in one last time. We're going from the big framework, past the problem-solving process, all the way down to a core instructional technique that actually primes the brain for this kind of work. It's called learning by evaluating, or LBE for short. And the key idea here is so clever. Instead of just telling students what good looks like, you fire up their own critical thinking by having them judge and compare different examples before they even start their own project. It's like a warm-up for your brain. So here's the core of it. Students get shown 2 examples, side by side, and they're asked a really simple question: which one is better and why? They can't just sit back. They have to make a call, and this is the most important part: they have to explain their reasoning. That act of justifying their choice, that's where the critical thinking really kicks in. So what happens when you ask students to do this? This data is super revealing. When they're just starting out, students overwhelmingly focus on aesthetics, how something looks. And that's fascinating because it tells an instructor exactly what their students' instincts are, which gives them the perfect jumping off point to introduce other important ideas like usability or clear communication. Okay, we have gone deep. We've looked at a framework, a process, and a skill. So now it's time to zoom all the way back out and see how these three powerful upgrades fit together. And really, it all boils down to this. These aren't three separate ideas floating around. They build on each other. The specific skill powers the structured process, which then works perfectly inside that big action-oriented framework. Let's just lay it out one more time so it's crystal clear. Learning by evaluating, that's what builds the core skill of critical judgment. That skill is exactly what you need to successfully use the design thinking process. And that whole process is the perfect engine for coming up with a solution inside the challenge-based learning framework. See how that all connect?
And that brings us right back to our machine metaphor from the beginning. Now you can see exactly how it all works. The skill, the process, and the framework. They're like these perfectly interlocking gears. Each one turns the next, and together they power this incredible learning engine that's dynamic, student-centered, and built to solve real-world problems.
And that brings us back to you. These designs for learning aren't just cool theories. They are tools for taking action. They give us what we need to move past just knowing things and start doing things that actually make a difference. So the only question left is, what challenge are you going to take on?